very good day to all you patriots out there, and welcome to TallShip Tuesday. I am Captain John Paul Jones, here again with another young patriot story. Today's story is entitled Constitution Summer by Marcella Fisher Anderson, and it deals with how this new country perhaps may establish its legislature after the end of the war. It had finally rained. The week before, Philadelphia's cobblestone streets had glistened and water had dripped from the long iron pump handles on street corners. Yet now the gardens were dusty again, and the mulberry leaves drooped in the sun's heat. Mary lifted her copies of the Philadelphia Gazette for Wednesday, August 8th, 1787. Under the sharp eyes of her employer, Mr. Sellers, she placed them in her leather pouch. Then she hitched up the outgrown pants that she had borrowed from her brother, pulled down the brim of his old felt hat, and deepened her voice. "I'll go on my way now, sir," she said to Mr. Sellers. Imitating a boy's long strides as best she could, she made her way to the city tavern, through the early morning sounds of dogs and roosters. "The streets are crowded again," she said to the tavern keeper working on the front porch. "The delegates have returned from the recess." The tavern keeper opened the door and pushed a wooden bock of Madeira wine just inside. "Their work goes on and on. To what end, I do not know. All is secret." "Indeed so. My brother Jonathan still stands guard at the State House door." "You can set the newspapers inside today. It's a windy morning." Before Mary could carry her papers to the table by the front entrance, 3 convention delegates banged through it and sat down in a booth. After ordering ale, they closed the curtains about them and started speaking quietly. Mary caught only snatches of their conversation when the tavern keeper served them their drinks. "I'm overcome to see our decisions set down like this. In such orderly fashion, yes, even to articles and sections. Every day we move closer to a new constitution." A smile touched Mary's face. "They're making progress," she said to herself. But before her thoughts could run on, she saw a tall, featureless figure standing in the doorway, his shape backlighted by the sun. His long hands dangled at his sides. He stood there a minute, a dark shadow, then entered and moved slowly to a table near the 3 men in the booth. Mary watched them. He greeted the tavern keeper in a rude voice. Was he one of those who were still loyal to Britain? She remembered what Jonathan had told her one evening. There are people about who hope the delegates will fail in their efforts to write a constitution for our new nation. They watch for chances to undermine the work of the convention. But how, Mary had asked. By twisting pieces of information dropped by loose tongues and passing on falsehoods to the newspapers. That's one way. When Mary left the tavern to complete her deliveries, the man was still sitting at the table, listening carefully to the 3 men in the booth. Just outside, she saw a sheet of paper that had blown around the stems of a boxwood. She drew out the sheet and carried it into the sun, smoothing it as she read. Section 8. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, to regulate commerce with foreign nations, and among the several states, and with the Indian tribes. Mary was reading so thoughtfully that she didn't notice that someone was looking over her shoulder. She gasped, knowing at once that the paper had been accidentally dropped from one of the delegates still in the tavern. As she turned around, she crashed into the stranger just behind her, striking his chest so hard that his silver buttons scratched her cheek. She stifled a cry when his strong hand seized the printed sheet from her fingers. The man ran down a crowded lane. Mary gave chase, certain now that he was up to no good, one of those Jonathan had warned her about. She hid her heavy pouch of newspapers behind a bench and ran on, grateful that long skirts did not hamper her flying feet. The man zigzagged in front of her and fumbled to pocket the paper. The streets were filled now with hawkers ringing their bells. Mary lost sight of him in the crowd. At the top of Market Street, the Delaware River shone just below her. She stopped to catch her breath taking in the view of ship's crews disembarking passengers and unloading barrels. The market stretched down to the water. Dogs and children ran among the covered stands set out with eggs, meat, pippin apples, fish, and piles of hard cheese. Suddenly she spied the man again, tall amongst the crowd. A farm cart loaded with cabbages and summer squash stood near her, its front wheels stopped by heavy bricks. She moved the bricks away, first one and then the other. Slowly, the cart started moving. It picked up speed as it neared the bottom of the hill. The man stood there, his spectacles on, reading the sheet of paper. He moved to his right just as the wagon changed direction too, making straight for him. With cries of alarm, people scurried out of the way. Absorbed in his reading, the man did not hear the warnings. He looked up just as flying vegetables from the cart struck his chest and the cart crashed into him. Mary hurried down the hill. She tugged at the corner of the important paper buried beneath the vegetables. It was wet with the juice of shattered squash, but still legible. The people gathered around the accident did not notice her. Carefully, she wiped the paper on her shirt. Trying not to attract attention, she walked slowly up the hill to the state house. Jonathan had just relieved for half an hour. He stood on the yard under the small mulberry tree, his hat off. He wiped the sweat from his neck as Mary handed him the paper. "Where did you get this?" he demanded sharply. Mary could not suppress a smile. "I can't tell you now. I have newspapers to deliver." Quickly, Jonathan folded the sheet into his uniform pocket. "I will give this to Mr. Madison when the session ends. We can talk later." When Mary returned to the bench to receive her newspapers, the pouch was empty. A coldness touched her heart. She dragged up the stairs to Mr. Sellers' office. His mouth opened in surprise when he saw her. "You've delivered the newspapers already?" "No, sir." She felt a flush move across his face. "Why is that?" "My copies of the Gazette were stolen, sir, save for those in the city tavern." He set down his quill pen. "I was inept, sir. I was detained by someone." That much was honest. She dared not tell him what had happened. She would appear disloyal for not bringing the documents straight to him. It was the kind of news all Philadelphia waited for. Mr. Sellers' eyes moved down to her feet, which she had forgotten to place sturdily apart. "Suppose you tell me your name again." She swallowed once. "Mary, sir." "Not Martin, as you first told me. And where did you get these clothes?" "From my brother, sir. He's the one who urged me to come to Philadelphia to earn wages. Pretending to be a boy was the only way I could find work. Our father cannot pay his debts. My oldest brother had never been paid for his army service. He was wounded. He has but one arm now. We've lost our mill." She bit down hard, drawing blood from her quivering lip. Mr. Sellers shouted. "Unemployment, is it? Hard times, is it?" His face reddened. "This new country, America, is in chaos." He thought for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Very well. You may stay on as long as the convention still meets into early fall, and as long as no one finds you out. But you must pay a portion of your wages for the stolen newspapers. Do you understand?" He took in a deep breath and looked at her hard. Carefully, he placed his quill pen into the pewter inkwell. "I'm just a poor printer of a newspaper, Mary, but I study and think about everything I read. I believe the new Constitution will do nothing to change the lives of women or slaves. It's a man's world, a free white man's world. Come September, you must go back where you belong. Home. Home." Suddenly, the very word sounded good. It would be apple-picking time. Later in the day, as Mary walked with Jonathan past Christ Church, she grasped his arm and said, "When I get home, I'm going to make a scarecrow with these clothes and set it up in Mama's corn patch. It'll make me never forget my summer here in Philadelphia." She smiled up at her brother, as if I ever could. Well, A most satisfying little tale there, isn't it? I suppose it just goes to show that even after we've won our independence from Great Britain, there's still much work to do in establishing a true nation, truly based on the pursuit of liberty and justice for all. Now, I do thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you next Tuesday. Have a good day.